Upon the announcement for 5.4 and the following livestream, there were a lot of disappointing reactions, and honestly, understandably so. This patch seemed lackluster compared to previous ones, and many had already jumped to the conclusion that this was going to be a filler patch. The one new character, Yume Mizuki, was going to join the standard banner in 5.5, and we didn't get any new land to explore. The main event quest takes us back to Inazuma, and with the focus being on Isa Bathhouse and the game design, the question of fan service came into full force, especially with the image making the rounds on social media. Per usual, I like to give it some time before deciding on my thoughts, and now that we're more than halfway into the patch, is 5.4 the worst Genshin patch to date? Well, while I certainly don't think it's a good patch, it's not the worst. I've been playing this game since version 1.4 and have played through some pretty bad patches, and if you'll allow me to ramble, let me tell you what I believe to be the worst patch. It's 2.5. 2.5 was also an Inazuma-focused patch, just like 5.4, except this was when a highly anticipated character, Yae was finally released. We also got the second part of the Raiden Shogun's story quest that unlocked her weekly boss, and that was it. This is pretty similar to 5.4's situation, with there only being one new character and story quest for content, which is why I think both of these patches are pretty bad. However, there are some other nuances that make 2.5 worse in my opinion. Before version 3 and Sumeru, Dendro did not exist. Yae, the one new unit at the time, heavily requires Dendro in order to function well. So to all the players who pulled for this unit on her release, she did not perform well at all. Her totems also had terrible aiming issues that the devs patched not only once, but twice. The first patch was to fix the aiming issue, but they did such a terrible job of it that the second patch was to revert the aiming issue back to the crappy state it was before. Her totems were prioritizing things like campfires, torches, boxes, etc. instead of enemies. It was during Inazuma that the devs also began to give us problems to sell us solutions, which many players were starting to catch on to. Let me give you a few examples. Rift Hounds were a new enemy that was released, I believe, in 2.2. They ignored shields completely, so you had to use healers. Okay, the game was making us use different units. I guess they got tired of us hiding behind Zhongli. I was extremely guilty of this. However, these enemies released at the same time Kokomi did, and it really felt like a tactic to sell her as she was a huge healer at the time. But there was a problem with Kokomi. There was a huge discourse over her negative crit at the time, and while that doesn't really matter anymore, at the time she released, she wasn't complete. Turns out, to unlock her potential, she needed the artifact set that wouldn't release until the next patch, which I think is the Ocean-Hued Clam set. So if you pulled her on the initial release banner, she didn't perform the way she should have until at least 6 weeks later when you were able to begin farming for the new artifact set. There were also some drama surrounding her because her weapon wasn't the best. She was right next to the Shogun's release banner during the anniversary. It was just a whole thing. Now fast forward to 2.5, you have Yae, a character that has her totems hitting torches instead of enemies. She isn't doing much damage because Dendro, her best reaction, isn't out yet. And to sell us one last solution to a problem, she has massive energy issues. You can fix this by either 1, getting her first constellation, or 2, playing her with the Raiden Shogun. Having a character release in what felt like such a broken state when there was nothing else to do in the patch was such a slap in the face. I really didn't like the direction the devs were going to create problems to sell us solutions. I get that they have to make their bag, but characters should feel complete. I think constellations should boost the capabilities they already have, not change things entirely. I'm sure if we took a moment to look at older units, we can see this applied to them as well. It just became far more apparent in Inazuma as most of the units had high energy costs, so the Shogun could fix it. I guess we also did get Enkanomiya events that some people blasted through in a day or two. Do any of you old players even remember the Enkanomiya zone? Anywho, my distaste for 2.5 is what made me quit spending on the game. I haven't spent money since this patch. 2.5 came out in February of 2022, 3 years ago. The crystals on my account are from the Welkins from way back when, and I'm saving them for when my boys Venti or Kazuha get a skin. I told myself if the game devs does one of 3 things to a satisfactory level, I would be willing to get a Welkin Moon again. Those 3 things are improve the wishing system, improve the resin system, or improve endgame. 3 years later, and I haven't spent on the game since. Now we're in 5.4 and we're facing a very similar patch to that of 2.5. The reason why I don't deem this patch as the worst patch yet, despite it being similar, is because at the very least we don't have a character releasing in a broken state like Yaimiko was. I hear that Mizuki isn't that good in terms of units, but as long as she works as she's intended and feels whole, then while it might not be ideal, fine. At least with her joining the standard pool, we'll have a chance at constellations. Or you'll be like me and never get a Tainari. The only reason I have him is because I did a pull on his initial banner when he had his debut in Sumeru. I do want to touch upon the amount of wishes available to us real quick. Back in 2.5, it was projected to be the worst amount of free pulls at around 60 wishes, and this is without Welkins or Battle Pass. For 5.4, we're looking at the new worst of around 55 wishes. If you lose the 50-50, you're not getting anywhere, and if you do have a Welkin or Battle Pass on board, you'll barely be getting to that 90 pity mark, if that. Both of these patches have a terrible amount of wishes available to the player. If you know of any other patches that have similar low wish counts, or even a patch that trumps these two as the worst in terms of wishes, do let me know in the comments. Gacha games with constant releases will always ebb and flow. For Genshin, whenever we enter a new version, the first few patches in a version with the Archon quests always tend to be full of hype and lots of content. It's when we get further into a version when things wind down and we tend to get the festivals and the more filler type content. The 5.4 festival was cute and we did get some lore with the Raiden Shogun, but I'm always torn. I'm happy to have gotten some cool lore, but as this is a limited time event, if you miss it, you'll never get to see it. But what do you think? Are you an older player like me who's gone through some crappy patches already, or are you newer and this is your first crappy filler patch? While 5.4 is definitely up there in bad patches, something pretty bad has to come our way to take 2.5's crown as the worst patch for me. The second runner-up would have to be the patch with Dia's release. Were you around for the Fix Dia social media movement? Much like Yaimiko, her ult was prioritizing campfires and torches. She wasn't very strong as a unit damage-wise, but worst of all, if you got frozen during her ult, it just cancels. When players went to report it as a bug because it's silly that a pyro character's ult gets completely cancelled due to being frozen, the reply was that, yup, Dia is working as intended. Don't get frozen, lol. Thank you for watching, and if you like Genshin content, I do have some others you can watch next. Otherwise, subscribe if you enjoyed, and I hope to see you again soon.